day 669 of the Trump administration. And however much her father and boss savaged Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail, tonight the senior advisor to the president, a public servant who also happens to be the president's daughter, has an email problem. Specifically, the Washington Post reporting that Ivanka Trump, quote, sent hundreds of emails last year to White House aides, cabinet officials, and her assistants using a personal account, many of them in violation of federal records rules, according to people familiar with a White House examination of her correspondence. White House ethics officials learned of Trump's repeated use of personal email when reviewing emails gathered last fall by 5 cabinet agencies to respond to a public records lawsuit. That review revealed that throughout much of 2017, she often discussed or relayed official White House business using a private email account with a domain that she shares with her husband, Jared Kushner. The article continues. The discovery alarmed some advisors to President Trump who had feared that his daughter's practices bore similarities to the personal email use of Hillary Clinton, an issue he made a focus of his 2016 campaign. Close quote, and a reminder.
33,000 emails are missing, and they say, oh, she's fine, she's fine.
Crooked Hillary Clinton. Oh, she's crooked, folks. She's crooked as a $3 bill. Lock her up is right. No.
Tonight, a statement from the spokesman for Ivanka Trump's lawyer reads in part, quote, while transitioning into government until the White House provided her the same guidance they had to others who started before she did, Ms. Trump sometimes used her private account, almost always for logistics and scheduling concerning her family. Just tonight, the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Elijah Cummings, Democrat of Maryland, tells NBC News the committee will likely investigate these new allegations against Ivanka Trump when the Democrats take over the House next year. Of course, this is just tonight's headline, and it comes after a weekend that saw the president diminish the commander of the bin Laden mission and the mission itself. He changed the name of a member of Congress, changed the name of a California town, went on another tear about raking and cleaning on our forest floors, and gave himself an A+ as president. More on all of that in order as we continue. And on top of that, he had a lot to say about the Mueller investigation and his choice to lead the Justice Department, Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker, who has been publicly critical of the inquiry. Trump was asked about it in the Chris Wallace interview that aired yesterday.
Did you know, before you appointed him, that he had that record and was so critical of Robert Mueller?
I did not know that. I did not know he took views on the Mueller investigation as such.
If Whitaker decides in any way to limit or curtail the Mueller investigation, are you okay with that?
Look, it's going to be up to him.
But you won't overrule him if he decides to curtail.
I would not get involved.
A source close to Whitaker tells NBC News he intentionally tried to catch the president's attention by raising his profile as an on-air CNN legal commentator. The incoming chairman of the House Intel Committee, Democrat Adam Schiff of California, has indicated that House Democrats plan to investigate Whitaker's appointment come January. The president got Schiff's name wrong this weekend while complaining that the congressman's been, quote, talking about the fact that Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker was not approved by the Senate, but not mentioning the fact that Bob Mueller, who is highly conflicted, was not approved by the Senate. We should point out this is in fact a red herring. Unlike the Attorney General, Mueller's job does not require Senate approval. For the record, though, the last times he did require Senate approval as FBI director, the votes were 98-0 and 100-0. Today, 3 Senate Democrats filed a lawsuit in federal court to block Whitaker's appointment, also citing the lack of Senate confirmation. Meanwhile, Politico reports that the president's lawyers have set Thanksgiving as an informal deadline for him to finalize his written responses to Robert Mueller's questions about the 2016 election. Trump had previously claimed to be ready and eager to sit down for an interview with the special counsel. Yet over these past few months, he and his lawyers seem to be less willing to talk to Mueller. Now it seems as if that door might have closed.
Is that your final position, that there's going to be no sit-down interview and nothing, written or in person, on obstruction?
I would say probably. Probably. I mean, I can change my mind, but probably. I think we've wasted enough time on this witch hunt, and the answer is probably. We're finished.
With that, let's bring in our leadoff panel, shall we? On a Monday night, Kimberly Atkins, Washington bureau chief for the Boston Herald, Jill Colvin, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Jeremy Peters, political reporter for the New York Times. So, Kim, Trump, you were there, and I don't mean to dredge this up, but you know this already. Trump said to his rally crowds during the campaign that the Hillary Clinton email fracas would turn out to be bigger than Watergate, that it would result in an administration consumed by investigation. And now what are we to make of tonight's headline?
Well, it's quite ironic, isn't it, that we have the exact same situation, an explanation that, well, how possibly could Ivanka have known that this was the rules if I suppose she was under a rock for the past several years, if that's the case. But we have, just as you pointed out, I mean, this isn't the first time that private email use has been an issue in this White House. It was an issue reported with her husband, Jared Kushner. And at that time, we had Democrats from the House Oversight Committee who were trying to bring an investigation to that, but the Republicans shut it down. Now we have the Democrats taking over, and that's going to be one of various investigations that we can certainly see open up, and this isn't going away anytime soon.
And Jill, how do you think her explanation will fly, kind of the ignorance of the law explanation?
Well, she can certainly make that argument. The spokesman for her attorney was making that argument tonight as the story was breaking. But I think, as you were just saying, it's very difficult, given the way that the president ran his campaign, for anyone to be able to stand up there and honestly say, convincingly say, that they didn't realize that they were not supposed to be using private email addresses when they are conducting official government business. If you look at some of the emails that were released by the Good Government Group that brought the FOIAs that eventually led the administration to discover these emails, these were conversations that Ivanka Trump was having not just with staff, not just, with her assistants or with secretaries. These were conversations that she was having with the Small Business Commissioner, with Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, with people at the highest levels of the Trump administration discussing, possible administration business. So it makes it very difficult to raise any type of argument saying she didn't know what she was doing. That said, the spokesman for her attorney, Abby Lowell, tried to make very clear, or at least tried to argue, that this is very different from the Clinton email situation, claiming that there was no classified information, claiming that no emails were deleted, trying to make the case that this is something that's very different. But as you could see from the Post story, there are deep concerns within the White House that this is just too similar.
Jeremy, Mike Flynn might have been the guy who delivered it with the most gusto of all, but let's remember, Lock Her Up was about emails. That chant was born of emails. And now, Jeremy, here come the Democrats, and that angered every last one of them.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Not just because of the hypocrisy of it all, Brian, but because Donald Trump has always believed that he gets to live by one set of standards and rules and set the norms, and everybody else just has to do what's right. What's the law? He never really thought that the law or the constraints of history or the office that he now holds as president applied to him. So I find it hard to believe that he's going to see that there's much wrong with what his daughter has done here, because we are, after all, talking about his daughter. I think, to your point, the fact that Democrats are now in charge of Congress and have the investigative power to look into this is interesting, in that it is just one piece of, I think, what we are going to see in the weeks and months ahead, especially the issue you alluded to at the top of the program, and that is the acting attorney general and what the House Democrats are able to do about that. The incoming chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, said that Mr. Whitaker will be the first person that he subpoenas. So we should definitely be on the lookout for that. That could get very explosive.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.